From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's today's lineup. On the cattle markets, Lee Schulz of Iowa State University. Among other things, Lee will share his recent analysis of the U.S. cattle by-product market, which has had an extremely strong year in 2021. Then K-State's Vipan Kumar will talk about a new approach to crop weed control that he's testing out in field trials in western Kansas. It utilizes a roller cage mill outfitted to the back of a combine to crush weed seeds as they're emitted from that machine. He'll tell what the early results are showing there. And on this week's K-State Agricultural Events Calendar, Ignacio Ciampitti previews the upcoming 2022 Kansas Corn Schools. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard once again for Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. And typically on a Monday, we start things off with a glance to the cattle markets, and we do so today. Lee Schulz is with us out of Iowa State University. Lee is a livestock economist there. Lee, the cattle markets tend to settle in for the holidays right around now. So in as far as day-to-day market moving factors, they're pretty limited at the moment, aren't they?
They are, and I don't want to say this was expected, but it was kind of expected given where the holidays land this year. I think the action that we've seen in November and December, it was a chance for markets to really, I think, take a step back and settle in. And realizing, we're still seeing relatively strong prices, even though we've taken a few dollars step back when you look at the Fed cattle trade this last week. And I think we're expected to really see this as we get into some lower slaughter weeks the next 2 weeks. If we can hold, I think that would be a success. So if we look over the next couple of weeks.
On the feeder cattle side, if there were one thing that might stand out, this renewed strength in corn prices seems to be affecting feeder movement at auctions and the tone in the market in general there. Your thoughts?
When you look at the feeder cattle market, I think you're pairing a few different things that are going on. Really, November, December were months to behold when you look at feeder cattle, both futures and the cash market. We've seen some considerable strength. And so I think you are seeing a little bit of I don't want to characterize it as a market correction, but again, I think just settling a bit back in. There's still a lot of optimism for feeder cattle as we're seeing the strength in fed cattle. But if we are looking at something that I think is on our radar, it's certainly the corn market, as you're starting to see that inch back up. Renewed talk of, maybe even increased cost of gains as we go into 2022. And that's, I think, a bit of hesitation there. I wouldn't look a lot into the large week-over-week declines we've seen in the feeder cattle market.
Before the holidays get here, the USDA will be squeezing in a couple of reports this week, including the monthly Cattle on Feed report Thursday afternoon. What are the preliminary numbers suggesting there?
First, to put into context, we had one more slaughter day, which also includes one more placement day. And so when you look at how those year-over-years match up for placements in November, expectations, I think that we're going to see larger year-over-year placements. We couldn't be in that 3 to 5% year-over-year increase. Now, I will note that placement number usually has a wide dispersion of pre-report expectations. And so, I don't think the market will be too shocked there, even if we do see that plus or minus from what I suggest there, just because of the wide variation. Or marketed numbers, I think those are expectation large year over year. That should equate to about cattle on feed numbers that are at par with year ago levels. When I look at the weights that USDA reports, those weights are still rather large. And so I don't want to say that we have any issues with currentness in the marketplace, but I think that does give some indication of what those on-feed numbers look like. So I think they may be a little bit front-end loaded, and that would really par well with what we're looking at fed cattle futures, as we're seeing a significant premium as you get out into the April contract. So there may be some larger supplies, heavier supplies to work through a bit here. That may be another reason why we're seeing a little bit of weakness in the fed cattle trade, as we're looking at lower slaughter numbers the next 2 weeks. A little bit heavier cattle. Those cattle need to get marketed, and that's putting a little bit of pressure on this market.
Also to be released this coming Thursday, the quarterly hogs and pigs report, and that's worth a look from the cattle market perspective because obviously competing meat supplies have a lot to do with what's happening in the beef trade and therefore the cattle market. What is the general gist of that outlook on hogs and pigs, Lee?
I think we could be in for a lot more surprises there compared to the cattle on feed report. I say that because the last report, we've seen a lot of surprises across the board on inventory numbers. I've been really characterizing this as expansion or contraction really seem equally likely for me. There's a lot of incentives for expansion, and then there's a lot of incentives to really, par back or even see some contraction in those hog and pig inventories. What I'm likely to see, I think, is lower numbers year over year. I think the slaughter numbers have been coming in lower than pre-report expectations. And so those numbers could be a little bit tighter, I think, than what we've seen. And certainly that's going to continue the story of tighter meat supplies as we go into 2022.
If there are any holiday surprises in that report, though, the cattle market, looking for something to react to, might gravitate toward such surprises. So this is worth watching, to be sure.
Certainly. I think next week, even though it's a holiday week, we have those two really benchmark reports. We also have a livestock slaughter report. So, in a weeks like this where there's not a lot of newsworthy things, and hopefully that's the case, we could see a little bit of market gyrations just due to maybe some of the surprises in this report. But I will highlight, I think the bounds have been set here over the last couple of weeks. So I wouldn't expect numbers to really derail too much from there. And as we get into 2022, I think markets are ready to take off too. And I think that's important to remember here that the fundamentals are there. And so, these next couple of weeks may just provide us that starting point for what we look at into 2022.
Well, we'd like to finish this segment with something that you put in article form recently, Lee. You did a quick analysis there of the by-product market from cattle processing. We don't talk about this regularly, but it is a significant component of the overall return on processing cattle. And those drop values, as they're described, have been strong for a while now, you say.
So I've been hearing chatter, and this is something, until I started to dig into it, it really provided a wow factor for me, how strong those values are. And I think there's a lot of argument that they've been one of the many factors that have supported cattle prices here in 2021. And I think what we can look forward to in 2022. Exports are a big part of that. So we got to remember that the strength we've seen in the export market, both from a volume and a value standpoint, are translating into higher byproduct values, higher meat prices, and higher cattle prices. But just to give you a sense of how strong those byproduct values are, we're seeing up 72% when we look at steer byproduct values compared to a year ago, almost to that level when we look at the 5-year average. Cow byproduct values have been really strong as well. So it's the byproduct values in aggregate and also the individual components that make up those byproduct values. When you dig into those components, I think it tells a really important story. So the offal products like tripe, which are beef stomachs, livers, tongues, are all up, but the tallow has been a really strong component. And if you think through why that is the case, when you look at a lot of interest and increases in biofuel production, vegetable oils are up tremendously. I think that's some of the highest inflation we've seen in ag commodities. So fats are equally up, and that's really what's driving that market. And then I think a side impact is just the supply chain disruption. So we've seen over time that some of these byproducts have been replaced by synthetics. But we've had some challenges just in transportation and sourcing raw materials. So I think the fact that these byproducts are being produced, they're in fixed proportions, I think that's helping out the demand of those.
And you have more to the article. We can't get into all of it, but one point you made that's quite interesting. folks, as they go to the meat counter now, purchase beef products thinking that they're on the pricey side when they're hearing that the byproduct market is extraordinarily strong. They might be coming to a conclusion that the byproduct strength is contributing to what's happening at the retail beef counter. You say that's just the opposite, actually.
Yes, and I think we need to appreciate the demand for those byproducts, because that's helping reduce or offset the cost of processing. And so if you think about if those byproducts were worth nothing, you're not able to capture that value. The packers aren't able to capture that value, and it becomes that much more costly to process that animal. If you have additional pounds and additional products, that helps you offset that cost. And so, I think that's something to keep in mind, that we're taking a beef animal and really extracting the highest value out of that animal. And even though prices are expensive right now, they could be worse if we weren't able to fully utilize that animal. So I think that's some appreciation to really have. And I think that's become even more and more obvious or important as we understand our supply chain and some of the disruptions we've had to our supply chains.
Again, this article that Lee has put together really captures all of this in good detail. Strong byproduct values lift cattle prices, and you can go to the Iowa State University Extension Agricultural Economics website to have a glance at that full write-up. It's worth a look. Lee, the best to you during the holidays. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and we will look forward to visiting with you in 2022. Many thanks right here.
I wish all the happiness to our listeners and look forward to discussing the markets with you in 2022.
Lee Schulz with us, livestock economist at Iowa State University. Agriculture Today returns in a few moments on the K-State Radio Network. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, a closer glance at research that's underway out of K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. It's examining and evaluating a novel new approach to weed control. It's quite interesting, and we're talking now with the weed scientist working on this now. Vipan Kumar is with us once more. Vipan, this is called the Harvest Weed Seed Control Approach, and it's an alternative to herbicide usage in a sense. Explain to us what you're looking at here.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me. Yes, rightly you said, harvest weed seed control is a kind of new, novel method of weed control has been discovered or developed by a grower in Australia. So basically, we see a lot of weeds at the time of crop harvest. Irrespective of crop, we see weed escapes or weed survivors at the time of harvest. So a harvest weed seed control implies that when we are harvesting a crop, we also harvest those weeds seed and destroy those seeds. So basically it's a weed seed crusher on the back of the combine, which has two impact mill. So basically when we harvesting a crop and collecting the crop grains as well as weed seeds going through the combine, and when the residue and the chaff is coming out of the combine, there is a seed crusher retrofitted equipment there that can grind those chaff as well as weed seeds and make them non-viable. So it's basically a mechanical way of destroying weed seeds so that we don't have a problem in next year.
That weed seed crusher, it's somewhat elementary in its makeup, isn't it? It simply grinds those seeds?
Yes, it does. So the concept came from Australia, as I mentioned earlier. Western Australia folks, wheat growers, were struggling with rigid ryegrass. Population of rigid ryegrass have developed resistance, multiple resistance to almost all the herbicide options they can go with. So those rigid ryegrass has become really a problem. So one of the growers kind of come up with this concept while harvesting those wheat field. Why not we just destroy those rigid ryegrass seeds at the time of harvest? So that's the concept. They mechanically come up with this seed crusher. It's called Harrington Seed Destructor. That was the original name. They started with using a 1 impact mill versus 2 impact mill and different horsepower on the combine. And slowly, there is a manufacturing folks here in North America. They are manufacturing this unit as well. And the one we bought is from Canada, basically a ready crop weed seed destructor. So that's what we are testing here in Kansas.
And you are partnering, by the way, with other universities, namely Iowa State University and the University of Arkansas, to evaluate this crusher, to get a sense of its effectiveness in seed destruction?
Yes, been collaborating with the folks from Iowa and Arkansas. Actually, we have received a federal grant to evaluate this method in high plain as well as Midwestern crops. And this is a USDA NIFA grant where we are looking at little hammers, all different methods or alternative methods of weed control in combination, how they play out in terms of long-term pigweed seed bank management. So we have a cover crops in that study, and we have seed destructor in that study, as well as our effective herbicide programs. All these methods, how they come together and help growers. So we're going to look at the long-term impacts of doing those practices in a long-term study.
What are the numbers that you've arrived at so far in the early going of this evaluation of the seed crusher then, in as far as rendering those weed seeds unviable?
Sure. We have just got this equipment in haze, and we have fitted on our combines. So this unit basically needs a special combine, a John Deere S-Series combine. So we have bought a combine as well as the crusher, the Ready Crop seed destructor, and it's equipped with the combine now. It's ready to go, but however, we were not able to test for this season. We just tested on one grower field for milo grower having a problem of palmer amaranth. In terms of early numbers of destroying those seeds, preliminary data from Iowa suggests that we can destroy up to 90% of water hemp when we use this equipment in soybean.
Wow.
So that's a lot of seed destruction and a lot of effectiveness to see at the time of harvest. You can imagine that 90% seed destruction, and if those seeds are resistant to some chemicals, you can see the impact for longer-term impact by using this technology.
As you look at this, do you suspect that this crusher will be effective on a wide spectrum of weed types then?
Yeah, so in Australia, this has been quite adopted technology among Western Australian growers or wheat growers. In U.S., this is kind of novel and a new technology, so we don't have much of a data to really demonstrate how it's going to be for different crops and for different species. So as I said, this is a kind of the first grant we got from USDA, and we're going to look into soybean production system. And along with these, I'm also part of a national weed science team. It's called GROW, which is the acronym is Getting Rid of Weeds. And that group is basically looking at all these alternative methods of weed control in different regions and different species. So in my area, we have kochia is a bigger problem, palmer, as well as water hemp in the eastern side of Kansas. So we're going to look at those weed species and different cropping system. We have milo, corn, as well as wheat and sunflower. So there's going to be a lot of data we need to look at it, and a lot of studies we need to conduct before we really can say something to our growers that it's going to be effective or not for that specific weed species or that specific crop.
And another angle that you say you want to take a look at is the economic viability of using this technology. It's a rather expensive piece of equipment, you say, so that'll counterbalance the herbicide treatment savings that one
Sure, yes, because economic drives all the weed seasons among the growers or weed control strategies. And we will have an economist on the team who's going to make a model to see the economic implications of using these technologies on a longer term, along with what we have already been doing, using effective programs, or, using alternative systems like a cover crops. So how much advantage we have in terms of increasing crop yield or mitigating herbicide resistance on the farm in the longer term. Because if you think from a resistance standpoint, we've been losing a battle in terms of herbicide options, and we don't have many options in the future because we don't have new mode of actions coming into the market. The herbicide cost is going up, so weed control input is going to go up. So we're going to see, comparisons, what we are doing now versus if we integrate these technologies in our system, how much economically sound we become in terms of, weed control decisions. So that's the plan, to look at all the aspects, weed seed bank management, economic side of it, as well as the efficacy side of it, and different species, different crops, and different regions, because high plain is different than Midwestern crops. So in high plains, no-till crops, how are we going to fit these technologies if it is effective? So all those pieces going to come together in next 4 to 5 years. That's the plan, and bring some strong recommendations for the growers through demonstration as well as the research studies.
You've quite some information here clearly to uncover, but by the sound of it, you're somewhat enthused about what this machinery might bring as far as weed control. Yes.
I'm looking forward. This is quite a novel and innovative way of looking the weed problems in the systems here for Kansas especially Western Kansas folks. We've been losing a battle, as I said, and relying too much on chemicals, especially no-till growers. And with the losing battle and increasing cost and herbicide costs going to go up, and if this technology works for kochia or palmer amaranth, and do for a couple of years, use this technology and get rid of your weed seed bank, I think this is going to be a win-win situation. Although, as you mentioned right now, this unit is quite costly. It's about $75,000 right now. But if our research data demonstrates and more of a manufacturer start making these destructor, I think the cost is going to go down and it'll be cheaper to buy in the future.
Well, looking forward to the research results that you come up with here on the function of this weed seed crusher and just how practical it might be as part of the overall toolbox for weed control. Vipan, thank you, and good luck with this work. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric.
Vipan Kumar, weed scientist for K-State, based at the Agricultural Research Center at Hayes, with us on this part of Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today is back now. As for this week's K-State agricultural events calendar, pretty spare, as you might imagine, with the holidays coming up. But do want to mention here that once we're past those, the very popular series of K-State corn schools will get going directly. 4 one-day in-person schools to be held across the state, plus there's 1 virtual session. Once more, K-State Research and Extension will be partnering with Kansas Corn to offer these winter learning sessions for you corn growers. Coordinating these, as usual, K-State Cropping Systems Specialist Ignacio Ciampitti.
Yes, I think that they are excellent opportunity more after 2 years of not having these schools. Because if you think about January 2020 was our last time. February 2020 was the last time that we had these schools. So we are coming 2 years. So really excited to make sure that we reconnect with our main roots, our stakeholders, farmers across the state. As always, Kansas Corn is putting an excellent, show, taking care of many things, great facilities, we'll have great food, collaboration with our county agents. So extremely important to make sure that we always are working with them. They are helping us on the local advertisement, making sure everything is key stakeholders at the local level are aware of this. So I think that we have an excellent set of topics. We're trying to keep the schools to respect the time of everyone, usually between early in the morning until lunch, to be kind of a relative short program, informative, but also a little bit on the short side to make sure that everyone kind of be able to do some other things during that date. So, keep us moving. And then we have set, 4 locations that they are basically locations across the state. And then we also have the opportunity for anyone that is missing those locations. We are planning to have a more complete virtual event that we will be offering. It will be short on the side because we are planning to have many speakers. We'll have probably 15, 20 minutes updates, even shorter. But very excited. Our first one is January 7, Oakley. Then we are moving the following week, January 14th to Salina. Then from there, January 18th to Parsons. And the following and the last event in person will be February 24th at Hiawatha. And then, as mentioned, that virtual event, Thursday, February 3rd, from 6 to 8 p.m., and most of the schools, as I mentioned before, they will be usually between 8:30 and around 1 p.m. So very excited about these schools. We will have updates on the markets, price, production, natural fertilizer cost
yes.
for next year, which is a hot topic. So seed input costs. So we are very excited because there are multiple speakers. With really good, interesting presentations. And then, again, more importantly, excited to connect with all the farmers across the state again.
These are great programs traditionally, and no exception this go-round, as Ignacio says, things like weed control, insect resistance, fertility management. There'll be talks about the economics of corn production and much more at each of these schools. And they do want one to reserve their spot in advance for these, if at all possible. Right, Ignacio?
Yes. We basically have a link for registration, and we are asking everyone to register as soon as possible. So if you look at the website for Kansas Corn, so it's kscorn.com/corn school.
K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti there. Once more, morning refreshments and a hot lunch will be provided at the in-person schools. And to repeat that lineup for you, Friday, January the 7th at the Buffalo Bill Cultural Center in Oakley. Then Friday, January the 14th at the Hilton Garden Inn in Salina. The following week, Tuesday, January the 18th, at the Holiday Inn Express in Parsons, and the last in-person session on Thursday, February the 24th, at the Fisher Center in Hiawatha. Plus, don't forget that virtual session taking place the evening of Thursday, February the 3rd. Registration for your corn school of choice available online at kscorn.com/corn school. And with that, our time is away. As always, thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.